Hello and welcome to Media MD, your weekly dose of media that you have somehow missed. I'm Reuben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And this fortnight we'll be checking in on our read of The Princess Bride. So Elliot, did you finish it?
I did. I skipped the introduction and I was meaning to come back to it, but then I forgot until about 5 minutes ago. So I did not read the 25th anniversary special introduction.
Okay.
But apart from that, yeah, I even got through the first chapter of the sequel.
Yes, which also doesn't exist. It's interesting to me. The original version when I read this book didn't have that, and then they re-released a version with a nice cover and all this stuff, and it had this additional chapter at the end, which is from, in air quotes, the sequel to the book, and it's very bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, that's sort of a whole thing we can get into, but maybe we should save that for later because it's after.
Yeah, well, let's just start with, what did you think of it?
Yeah, no, I quite enjoyed this. Yeah, I mean, I kind of, it took me a while to get started, mostly because I had to track down a copy, and I eventually found one in a library nearby, so I had to join a library, which is something you can still do. Then sort of chewed my way through it pretty quickly because it was pretty captivating.
Yeah.
But so I guess to start with the plot summary, as is traditional.
As we do, sure.
I mean, have you not seen the movie? That was to the listeners, because I mean, just go and watch that. That pretty much covers it.
Yep.
It's basically a sort of intentionally over the top fairy tale, is sort of how I'd describe it.
Yep.
There's a girl who lives on a farm, and there's a sort of slave farm boy on the farm, and she treats him like shit all the time. And so then for some reason he likes her, and then somehow they have true love. And then a whole bunch of shenanigans ensue because she has to marry a prince, and he becomes a pirate. And then they live happily ever after.
Yep. Well, I mean, until the sequel, am I right? It goes crazy again. I'd kind of describe it as a mix of an adventure book and a fairy tale. But yeah, over the top is definitely a descriptor that I would apply to it.
And I mean, because that's the thing. This book to me, it seems to be simultaneously kind of mocking and parodying fairy tales and sort of, over the top traditional stories, while at the same time celebrating them. It's like it's one of those things that's both celebrating it and kind of highlighting the weaknesses, which probably also comes from a place of love. Like, he clearly, William Goldman, I haven't really seen or read much of his other stuff, but he clearly loves storytelling, and this book is sort of coming from that place and pointing out the traps storytellers can fall into as a part of celebrating that love of stories.
Yeah. So that's our plot summary. I am curious to know what you thought of. I mean, watch the movie, guys. Like, it's pretty well known.
And so actually, I rewatched the movie last night, the night before we're recording,
nice.
After finishing the book, just to sort of, because it had been years since I saw the movie, and I just thought I should refresh myself on that as well after having finished the book.
Give us the goss. What's the comparison?
Yeah. So I think it's a great adaptation. Like, I think this is something we've talked a bit about on the podcast before, but in terms of something, particularly turning a book into a movie, it can be quite hard to sort of really capture what makes the book great. And I guess having William Goldman behind the scenes on both did do a really good job of sort of capturing the essence. But there's definitely, I mean, I think you said this in our prescription, the books just a book just gets to go into things a bit more and develop things and get you more invested, and that's just kind of missing from a movie, and that's not really the adaptation's fault. That's the fault of the fact that they had to cram it all into 90 minutes.
Yeah, I think one good example of that is in the book, as you start to meet Fezzik and Inigo on this weird cliffs of insanity, you just dive into their backstories for like a chapter, and it really helps to flesh out these well-rounded characters.
Yeah, what the book does is just sort of cut away. It'll be like the man in black who, surprise twist, is Wesley.
No.
We did say spoilers.
Did we?
Yeah, I just did.
Spoilers.
We'll edit that back in so it's earlier, and then I won't have lied. Yeah, just before Wesley sort of encounters each one, like, before he fights Fezzik, it cuts back and gives us all Fezzik's backstory, whereas the movie just kind of crams that into a 30-second bit of expositionary dialogue right before the fight. Yeah. And that obviously doesn't work as well, but it's probably as well as they can reasonably do in the movie without just completely breaking momentum, because it's more important to keep that momentum in the movie than it would be in the book.
Yeah.
And there were a few weird arbitrary changes. Like there's a bit where Buttercup falls in the water, sort of right near the start, and there's sharks in the water, and eventually she gets out. But then they changed it to eels in the movie. I never really understood why. That seems very arbitrary. Like I'm not really saying that as a criticism. It just was weird. I was like, I don't know why they changed that.
Yeah, and is there any differences between for the Zoo of Death?
Yeah, the Zoo of Death. The Zoo of Death isn't in the movie. Like they just call it the Pit of Despair, and it's just like,
oh, that's right,
one little room. Yeah. They because that was one thing in the movie. They sort of reference Prince Humperdinck's hunting like a handful of times, but you never actually. Yeah, it kind of comes out of nowhere. Whereas in the book, like there's entire paragraphs early on dedicated to sort of setting up Prince Humperdinck as this guy who loves to hunt, and they skipped that part. Yeah.
And wakes up every morning like wrestling orangutans and shit.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, they just completely skipped that in the movie. And so then in the second half, occasionally people reference his hunting prowess. And if you don't have the book knowledge, it just sort of seems like random details that don't actually mean anything.
Just a random fact that's thrown in to try and to flesh out the character.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah,
I think the other thing I thought worked much better in the books than it did in the movie was when Buttercup and Wesley end up sort of stuck in the fire swamp. It talks for ages about how they're being stalked by these ROUSs.
Yeah,
and it never actually tells you what those are. And so you sort of like, I was just wondering, I was like, did I miss it? And I was rereading things and I'm like, oh my God, this is so tense. And then it turns out to be like 80-pound rats that are terrifying. Yeah. Huge rats. Whereas obviously in the movie, it doesn't quite work as well because it just shows giant rats sort of following them. And I mean, that's cool, but I really liked the way the book just called them by that abbreviation ROUS. So you're sitting there going, oh my God, what are these things? And just sort of internally panicking.
The other thing I remember about the fire swamp is they spend time talking about how it's like the place that parents will threaten to send their kids to if they're bad. And it's like this built up as this almost mythical level of danger and evil. And I think this is kind of symptomatic of the main thing that makes the book better than the movie, which is just it just gets everything its own space a lot more. Like the book has more space to make things better.
No, I mean definitely. But yeah, no. I'd definitely say the book is better than the film, but the film is a great adaptation. Like I'd almost be tempted to in the future if somebody hadn't seen the movie or read the book, I'd probably just get them to watch the movie. Or if you know somebody who likes the movie, then it would be like, well, you should read the book because it's just like a better version.
Yeah.
But I'd probably still start with the movie because it's so good. And then it's like, if people like it, then you sort of go the next level up by just reading the book.
And I think the movie is more accessible. I mean, I love the book, but the the weird framing device. It definitely makes it a bit of a weirder experience to recommend to someone.
And that's a good segue to start talking about that, because I think this is going to be a whole thing. I mean, this whole framing device where he's pretending to be abridging something that a fake author wrote, that I'm really glad you taught, because sort of reading all of this, I was sitting there and I was thinking, oh, this is so obviously fake. Like, how do people fall for this? But I mean, you had told me, and I honestly, I can't sit here and 100% confidently say that if you had not told me, I would not have fallen for part of this and tried to Google where Florin used to be in Europe.
Because
he does really, he just carries on, and so it sort of takes like a few forms. The opening of the book is basically William Goldman just talking about a kind of fake version of his life, but he throws in enough real details that I actually did have to Google it to confirm.
Yeah.
Because like he talks about things like working on the Stepford Wives, which I knew for a fact that he had actually worked on, but then like he makes up a son and a fake version of his wife who he seems to really hate.
Yeah, it's weird. If I was married to him, I would. It would be hard not to read into
especially since I don't know if his real wife is a psychiatrist like his fake wife, but it'd be hard not to overanalyze that if you were actually married to him.
Yeah.
And so that stuff still kind of got me, but so he sort of opens up talking about this sort of fake variation of his life, and why the book matters to him, and why he ended up trying to abridge this fake original version.
Yeah.
And then you get into the actual book, or the abridged version of the actual book that's not real. And it's great because it's like the story, and then the original author, who's not real, includes all of these asides in brackets. And then you also have William Goldman's asides as the abridging author.
Yeah.
And so it's just sort of layer upon layer of meta jokes about this story and what it's all about.
And this
it's
fictional
hilarious.
World.
Yeah, and so in particular, like I loved the bits where it would just cut to William Goldman. He's like, so what I've done here is just cut like 70 pages of, people talking about trees, because it was so boring, and the professors of S. Morgenstern, who's the original author at Columbia University, told me that I was missing the point, and it was actually super interesting satire, but I just thought it was boring, so I cut it. And he's just creating like fights that he's having with professors of a made-up field, trying to justify why he cut bits, and it's so nonsensical. It's great.
Yeah. I really do like the dynamic of his editor's notes, as well as just the style that the original, in air quotes, is written in. With the like asides and stuff. Like at the start of the book, there's a lot of stuff where S. Morgenstern, let's say, is setting the scene and saying things like, "Oh, this was before taxes, but after France," to frame the time period, and it doesn't really make any sense.
Well, and they're all contradictory. Like he'll say, this is sort of after taxes, but before France, and then later on he talks about how it was like after light bulbs or something, and I was like, I'm pretty sure France was around before light bulbs. Like he's just making shit up.
I love this book, Elliot. It's great.
I mean, there's one bit. I think it's actually like the second or third chapter. I've got this copy sitting in front of me, but I won't make you sit here while I spend 5 minutes finding the second chapter. But he just cuts out the whole chapter. So the entire chapter is just one page of him ragging on how shit the chapter was. And it's kind of great as well, particularly when you sort of get into the sequel, because in the first one he's actually quite hostile towards S. Morgenstern for the bits he's cut, whereas sort of as he goes into in the sequel, he was a bit under a bit more pressure when abridging the sequel, so he gets a little bit more defensive and insecure about why he has to cut bits, which is a great little change.
Yeah.
But it's also great sort of just from, and like looking at it from the real life William Goldman sort of thing, it comes back to that whole thing about how he wants to just celebrate storytelling, because what it allows him to do is just cut out the bits that he doesn't want to write or doesn't actually want to flesh out, and just sort of summarize them in a little aside, but make it that it's not his fault. It's this other original author's fault for making it so terrible. So he just gets to skip the so-called boring bits and be like, oh, well, it's not my fault. It's the original author who fucked it up, which is pretty funny.
one of the other things it lets him do is kind of complain about the whole book writing process and like editors and all that stuff in a way that you wouldn't see so self-aware in traditional novels.
Yeah, that's true. Those bits are great. And yeah, like you said, the sort of the asides by S. Morgenstern, the original author, are great, particularly when he's over sort of clarifying things. Like there's one bit where they get given this pill to bring Wesley back to life, and it's meant to work for 60 minutes. And then after they leave, the guy who made the pill remembers that actually it's only going to work for 40. And then for over the next chapter, there's probably about 30 references to them saying, oh, we only have like 60 minutes or 55 minutes. And every single time there's a little thing in brackets being like, but actually it was only like 35 minutes because they didn't know that they had to. And I think I must have read the phrase like, but they didn't know that about this 20-minute time difference like 20 times.
Yeah.
And I mean, the characters in this book are pretty good. Actually, ironically, I'd say Wesley and Buttercup are probably the least interesting, despite being sort of the two mains. Like Physique is fascinating. God, I'm just realizing I don't really know how to say his name out. Like Inigo
Montoya
is. Yeah, he was great.
Yes,
the bad guys like the Sicilian and Humperdinck and even Count Rugen. Are all pretty interesting. They're all sort of over the top, but their shticks are kind of interesting enough to make them work well. Yeah,
the interesting thing to me is every character is the best in the world at something.
yeah. He does love sort of being like setting everyone up. Like even Miracle Max, the guy who's only really in like 1.5 scenes, is just established as far and away the best Miracle Man to have ever existed. And, Physique is the strongest and Vizzini is the smartest. And he likes to, and I mean, that's sort of that classic sort of fairy tale thing where you just sort of talk everyone up and they're all the grandest, and because it like raises the stakes when everyone's the best at everything.
That's the thing about this book, is that it revels in its own kind of ridiculousness and self-aggrandizing.
Yeah, it does, and because like I said, I think that's all part of its way of celebrating that sort of thing, while at the same time pointing out the stupidity of some of it. And I just wanted to quickly point out, I've just noticed this staring at my copy of The Princess Bride. This is how deep the whole sort of fakeness of it goes. So this copy of mine on the back has, sorts of various reviews. So it's like a whacking, charming, and funny fable by the New York Times and stuff like that. And the last one is it's very long, so I'm not going to read it, but it's by Henried Pavel, author of The Middle Morgenstern. So he's managed to include a fake quote by someone from a fake publication that just fits into this fake world that he's created in his book, which is just... Yeah, I mean, that kind of summarizes it up a bit, I think.
We could talk about... I think I could talk about the things I love about this book forever. But in the interest of making a podcast, do you have anything that you want to point out that you didn't like about the book, Elliot? And it's okay to say no.
No, so I mean, like I said, I thought like Wesley and Buttercup sort of fell a bit flat for me. Like obviously, and I mean the book sort of mentions this every now and then, but their whole relationship is obviously a bit ridiculous and I mean objectively not a healthy one.
Yep.
Which sort of fits into that whole fairy tale genre that it's sort of trying to celebrate, because I mean if you think back to like every Disney princess movie, like most of those weren't particularly genuine and healthy relationships either. But it just kind of like, I mean, Buttercup was such a terrible person for most of it. It just kind of makes it a bit ridiculous that everyone's doing all this stuff for her, and she's just such a terrible person to everyone. And similarly, like Wesley, the way he just sort of goes away for a few years and comes back and he's better than everyone at everything. It was kind of funny, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, but this invalidate, like we get Inigo's whole backstory about how great he is at swordsmanship and how much he's trained for fencing. And then Wesley has gone away for a few years, kind of mostly done other stuff, but is still better than him. And it kind of invalidates everything that we've just read.
Everything that he's done. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I'd probably say that was my weakest thing. I've also, I mean, this is something that goes back to the movie, but I often forget that the second half of the movie exists. Like when I picture the Princess Bride, the movie, I'm really picturing that first half, which is Wesley just sort of chasing after the people who've kidnapped Buttercup. And then it's like every time I watch it, I kind of get surprised that there's all this shit afterwards in Florin.
About the wedding and everything.
Yeah, just because, I mean, it's like a weird structure. And this isn't really a criticism. It just sort of always catches me off guard. But it kind of feels like it's a little bit inverted in a way because you end up with this epic tale of Wesley going and saving her from kidnappers at the start, and then the second half is where like all this terrible stuff happens to both of them, and it's actually really bad, and they sort of barely escape and all that. So it's always just felt like a weird pacing and weird structure to me.
Interesting. I never really thought about that, but it is like the epic chase, and then that kind of ends after they get through the fire swamp, and then the story does kind of twist around.
And I mean, you know, there's probably, you could probably talk that into something about inverting fairy tale tropes and all that, but it always catches me off guard.
Yeah, I mean, we start following Inigo and Fezzik.
Yeah.
Fair. Interesting. I don't know how valid it is to criticize the realism of the movie. Just in the sense of it's clearly meant to be quite ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they sort of they played that up even a bit more because, like, watching the movie, they had sort of much more comedic twists on people like Miracle Max and stuff. Like, they all felt a bit more played up and more like comedy relief characters, whereas in the book, they were more like sort of well-rounded out type characters. Yeah. But again, that's probably the movie just having to cut corners.
Cool. So, overall, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty good book. Like I said, if people haven't seen the movie, I'd probably recommend that first, and then if they like it, I'd suggest this as a way to sort of keep digging. But I guess I'm here to review the book. So, I mean, I'll give this an 8, I guess. Honestly, I haven't thought about it till now. I probably should have, but that's just my gut instinct.
Okay, cool.
But before we end, I said we'd talk about the whole sequel thing later.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I just wanted to bring it up because the backstory part to the sequel was possibly one of my favorite parts. Which is just he sort of sits down to try and abridge the sequel, runs into legal issues because he's made this author famous with his first one. There's like an estate, and he has to deal with the estate, and they've decided they want Stephen King to abridge it instead, and then he sort of turns into this whole thing where he's meeting with Stephen King and having arguments with Stephen King because it turns out Stephen King's great uncle is Florinese, and it's all just ridiculous. And then he goes from there to actually abridging the first chapter of this book, which is clearly because I think it was like this sort of first chapter thing was just written for the 25th anniversary of the first. And so he sort of takes all the ideas from the first one and dials them up to 100. Like it just starts so ridiculously and you know, puts the old one to shame in terms of ridiculousness. And then of course it's mostly just him cutting in with his abridges notes being like, this is so over the top and stupid and you know, why am I even doing this? And it's great. It's definitely, I mean, it'd probably be hard at this point.
The plot of it is Buttercup and Wesley are having a baby, and then there's like a shadow man who's like coming to, I don't know, steal the baby or something. There's a lot of weird stuff. It gets very strange very quickly. Like the man has magic powers and stuff, which haven't really
existed in the series until this point. Like, he just sort of introduces magic powers.
Yep.
It's pretty funny. I mean, I think somebody would struggle to find an edition now that didn't include that, because even the 25th anniversary edition now is like going on over 15 years old. So, like, you probably struggle to find a copy that doesn't have that, I reckon.
Yeah, but more stuff in this weird world.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. I'm glad to hear you like it. I like it a lot, so I'm glad that I was able to share it with more people.
No, definitely. I mean, this is just, like I said, I think this book just celebrates storytelling, and obviously we probably wouldn't be doing a podcast like this if we didn't enjoy stories. So
exactly.
It's probably a pretty easy sell to to people like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'd love to hear what you thought of the book. So please leave us some comments in the Reddit discussion threads, which can be linked in the show notes, which are, let me say that again. Down in the show notes below, in the description part of the podcast.
100% for sure.
Yep, to our Reddit thread. It'll be there, I'm telling you. And then you can leave comments, and we'll take a look at them and we'll respond to them. If you want to have more discussion about the book. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook if you want to interact with the show, or leave us a review on iTunes, which would be pretty helpful. Hey, you should do it. You can check out our website, which has links to do all of those things I just mentioned, links to our discussion threads, ways to contact us, and all of our previous clues for the Media MD ARG. You can help us figure out just who is Dr. MD, and why is his baby so big. Elliot, why don't you tell the listeners this week's clue?
Sticky tape.
Sticky tape. We will see you next week.